This is A Geek Leader. I am super excited today, guys. We have Todd Henry, the author of Accidental Creative, Die Empty, and his newest book, Louder Than Words. Todd, go ahead and take a minute and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I like to informally quip that I'm an arms dealer for the creative revolution, right? I spend my time working with creative people and teams and helping them be better at what they do, help them come up with ideas when they need them and understand some of the ways that they often get in their own path as they're trying to do their best work.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I first picked up on your work. It was probably about the time that Die Empty was coming out. I started reading the Accidental Creative. It was recommended to me by one of the creative directors at my church. So I picked it up and just absolutely loved it. And I was really fortunate, I think, to be able to finish it up about the time that Die Empty came out, because although the books really aren't related, I felt like the Accidental Creative kind of left me at a cliffhanger for needing Die Empty.
Well, that was, in some ways, it was kind of intentional, right? I sort of refer to all three of these books, the Accidental Creative, Die Empty, and Louder Than Words, as kind of the creative professional trilogy. I didn't intend for it to be that way, but that's kind of how they worked out, where one sort of leads to the other, because the Accidental Creative is about organizing your world so that you're prepared when you need to have ideas. And it's really kind of the nuts and bolts in the weeds kind of book. Die Empty is about, okay, great, you're organized. Now, are you doing the work that really matters? And then Louder Than Words, the new book, is really about, okay, you're doing the work that really matters, but is anybody really going to care about it? Because have you taken the time to figure out, is your work resonating with the people that you're trying to reach and impact? And so it's funny because one leads to the other. And I don't know if there's going to be a fourth in this series along the lines of these, but yeah, it's kind of neat that you picked up on that.
Yeah, well, I really hope that there is.
There will be another book. I just don't know if it will pick up on the same vein as these. I don't know. So we'll see.
Okay. So in this book, Louder Than Words, you're talking about finding your authentic voice. How would you define voice? Is it, I guess being from a leadership background and focusing on, people that have to think for their living in software or in technology, how does voice relate to that?
Yeah, so voice is an expression through a medium to achieve an impact. An expression meaning it's rooted in something that you want to say, something you care about, through a medium, which is your platform or the craft that you choose to use to express it. And then the third component is to achieve an impact, because if you're a voice screaming in the wilderness and you're not actually reaching somebody, then you are ultimately, your work is going to fail. So you have to have all three of those components in mind when you're thinking about what you're doing. So when you apply that to, if it's coding, if it's doing technology work, whatever it is, the expression through a medium to achieve an impact. And we all know that there are people who have this ability to persuade, to lead, to mobilize people, to influence people, because they have figured out what it is they care about. They understand who they are and what they care about. They've become a master of their craft, and so they have credibility, but they also have a vision for where they want their work to go. And so as a result, they're able then to persuade other people to close that gap, to achieve an impact, because they have that impact in mind as they're communicating. They're not just speaking for self-gratification. I think sometimes, John, when we talk about finding our voice or developing our voice, it's an exercise in self-gratification. I just want to enjoy what I'm doing. I want to feel like I'm expressing myself, and that's fine. But that's ultimately very shallow and short-lived if you don't understand the impact you want to have through your work. So the impact has to come. You don't have to understand exactly where your work's going to go, but you have to have a sense of what it is you're trying to do and the impact you want to have if you want your work to resonate ultimately.
Right. Like you have to have a vision of where it's going to be leading, right?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good. So now that you've, I guess, and in your book, I noticed you mentioned developing your voice and not really the term finding your voice. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, so I think a lot of times when we think about voice, we use this phrase "find your voice." We tend to think it's this thing that we're going to go off on we're going to go excavate, and we're going to dig something up. We're going to say, "Okay, I've found my voice, and forever and always, this is my voice, and this is who I am." And I don't think it really works that way. I think that the reality is it's a long journey. It's a lifelong journey of developing your voice, of sharpening, of honing, of refining, of committing to the process of getting to the heart of who am I, where am I going, and how will I get there? What kind of impact do I want to have? Those are lifelong questions. And so any place in the book where I was tempted to use the phrase find your voice, I scrubbed that and I use the phrase develop your voice instead. Because if you talk to resonant leaders, resonant artists, resonant people who are creating, writing, designing, whatever it is they're doing, they are people who have been on this journey of developing a unique voice over the course of many years. There are always unicorns. There are always one-of-a-kind people who are just immensely talented, and they come out of the womb, creating great work. But those people are very few and far between. And I know I'm not one of them. I assume most of the people listening to this are not one of those unicorns either. If you are, best wishes. I have nothing to offer you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're listening.
Right, exactly. But the reality is most of us have to work for what we have. We have to develop what we have over time. And there's a very specific way that we can go about doing that. But we have to embrace the process of developing our voice if we want our work to be heard. The reality is we all want our work to be heard. We all want our work to be recognized. We want to have influence in whatever capacity we engage in. But that doesn't happen by accident. Attention for your work is not a birthright. You have to earn it over time. And so we have to commit to the process of developing our voice if we want our work to ultimately stand on solid ground and not collapse under scrutiny.
Yeah, that's good. And when I'm hearing this, I'm thinking, you talk about developing your voice instead of finding it, which means that your voice is going to change over time, right?
I think it should change as your circumstances change, as your response to your environment changes. The context for your work is constantly changing. And so we see this. We see this with people who get stuck in a mode of communication, or they get stuck in a mode of expressing themselves, and they're not able to shift and change with the context. And so as a result, their work becomes dated, or it becomes irrelevant because they're not paying attention to the context. They're not paying attention to their intended audience and empathizing with them. Now, this doesn't, by the way, when we talk about cultivating and developing and harnessing your authentic voice, and putting that out there and creating resonant work, that doesn't just mean being transparent. It doesn't just mean showing everything all the time, which is what we tend to think of when we think of authenticity. What it means is investing yourself in the work, doing work that you really care about, putting yourself fully into it, showing your audience you have skin in the game, right? And when you do that over the course of time, and you pay attention to the shifting context, and you pay attention to what your audience is already resonating with, and you pay attention to their needs, you pay attention to where you want to lead them ultimately, then it helps you create work that is more impactful, because you're not just shooting from the hip. You're not just making what you want to make. Instead, you're developing your ability to connect with others as you pay attention to the environment, as you sharpen your skills, as you root yourself in something that matters to you. And ultimately, the result is that your work is going to be more substantial, and it's going to resonate more deeply with your audience. Yeah,
that's really good. And while you're saying that, I was thinking back to Die Empty. You mentioned, you talked about how passion is something that you're willing to suffer for. And that seems to follow right along line with, what you were saying right now with, when you find your authentic voice and develop that authentic voice, you're developing it to kind of meet a need of your audience and bring them to a place where you're at. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And, we tend to think, especially with artists, we tend to think that artists are just creating for themselves. And you actually hear people say that. And you will hear some artists say, I create for myself. And again, that's fine. That's totally fine if that's the path that they've chosen. That's what they want to do. But I've met just as many artists and brilliant contributors and brilliant leaders and brilliant writers and designers who offer the exact opposite advice. And they say, no, I don't just create for myself. In fact, I don't create for myself at all. I am creating because I want to connect with someone. I want my art to move people. I want it to have impact. And so, one way to do that, and we have sort of been dancing around this the whole conversation, but I talk about 3 elements in the book that comprise a resonant voice. And the first one is identity, and we've touched on that a little bit, about rooting yourself in what matters to you and understanding who you are, understanding what principles you're going to go to the mat for every time, and rooting your work in something that you really care about, and also rooting your work in something that really defines who you are, not something you're making up. When we talk about personal branding and these kinds of phrases, we tend to mean constructing some kind of external shell, right, around us that we project to the world. And that's not what I'm talking about at all when I talk about identity and understanding your identity. I'm talking about instead doing some serious excavation, figuring out who you are, what you care about, when you're at your best, and founding your work upon that bedrock. But once you do that, you also have to have a sense of vision for your work, which means you have to define your intended audience. You have to understand who it is you're trying to reach. And by the way, I'm not talking about a demographic or a psychographic or a group of people or a person who is like such and such. I'm talking about defining your audience so specifically that it's as if you're creating that work for one person. Somebody who talked about this in his own book on writing was Stephen King. He talked about how he always had his ideal reader in mind as he was writing all of his books. And in this case, his ideal reader was his wife, but he was writing the books as if he was writing to one person. And I think when we do that, when we create our work as if we're creating for one person, and by the way, I've done that with all three of my books. I've written them as if I'm sitting across the table from one specific person. They've been a different person for each book.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is it the same person every time?
Not the same person. No, not the same person. But because, they're different books for different reasons, right? But no, there was one person I was writing the book to, and I wrote it as if they were sitting across the table from me, and I was writing to them. And when you do that, it helps you be precise. It helps you be consonant in your work to ensure that you're not waffling, you're not being too fuzzy, that you're, one of the things that people often say about my writing, about my books, is it's very precise and very indicting sometimes, which I don't know how to feel about that. But I think what they're pointing at is that it is very precise. I'm not writing to groups of people. I'm writing to very specific individuals or an individual. And so as a result, it comes across as if I'm writing directly to the person reading. And so I would encourage anybody who wants to do work of substance or that resonates to consider who is your intended audience, who is that person that you're creating for. And by the way, if you're selling an idea into your organization, maybe you need to sell an idea to the upper ups in your organization. As you're thinking about your message, don't just think about what you want to say and your rationale. Consider the person that you're trying to communicate with, right? Who is your intended audience for that? Who is the person that you want to speak to? And you'll be able to craft your language and be more precise in how you do that. And so we talked about identity, we talked about vision. The third element of this is mastery, which is making sure that you have mastery of your craft, making sure that you own a platform that you're going to be able to use to be able to express yourself. Because you can have a sense of identity, a sense of vision, but if you don't have mastery of your craft, you're going to be seen as lacking credibility. And so you have to be good at what you do. You have to master empathy. You have to master timing. And you have to have the skills that you need to be able to bring that work into the world. So that's a very rough, broad overview. But identity, vision, mastery are the three kind of core elements of the resonant voices that we experience in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think that's great, the way you broke those down into three things. And I think one of the things that I like most about this book is how you have practical things that people can do on a daily basis, really, to like build up those things. Can you talk a little bit about the practical things that we can apply?
Sure. Yeah. So in each of these kind of three core areas, I really wanted to figure out what is it that works well for people who are already doing this. What is it that they have found to be effective in helping them cultivate whether it's a sense of identity, a sense of vision, or a sense of mastery. And so I'll just give a couple of those. With regard to identity, one of the things I recommend is to write a manifesto. And we tend to think of manifestos as these documents that we nail on the wall and we share with the world and sort of say, here I stand kind of thing, publicly proclaiming who we are and where we stand. Certainly they have been that in many instances, especially with social movements and political movements and things like that. But I'm talking about writing something that is a set of tenets that your work is founded upon. What are the things that you care about so deeply that you refuse to compromise them? These are the things that you will infuse into your work. These are the ethics by which you will engage your work because you care so deeply about them. It's really important. It's important to have have a sense of who you are, a sense of what you care about. And so writing a manifesto can be a really great way to do that. And it doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be 10,000 words. It can be 500 words. Some of the manifestos I found in my research were as few as like 30 to 40 words, right? But I would recommend that you do that because it really helps you understand what you care about. And sometimes putting things into writing can clarify areas of confusion for you. So that's one thing that I would really encourage people to do.
Yeah, and one thing about that, like what I just recently did for my team is we put together kind of like a code, I guess, of and it's just what you're talking about, a manifesto, where I have things like, we will think big but start small. We don't create waves, we ride them. Just little short sentences that kind of help us make decisions on a daily basis to keep us consistent in what our vision is and what our mission is.
Right, absolutely. Well, and that's the thing. Like when things get confusing, when times are uncertain, and they're always uncertain, having a set of tenets you can go back to, or a founding document for your life and your work, can be really helpful. Now, I don't want to create busy work for anyone. I know that we're all busy. We've got a lot going on, and sometimes sometimes people like me can give you a bunch of things to do, and it just feels like busy work. And really, we're just saying, hey, go do these things and these things and these things, and this might work. Let's throw some spaghetti against the wall. And I really want to be careful not to do that for people. I really wanted to try to figure out what are the couple of things, the one or two things that people can do that might provide some clarity. So that's certainly one of them. And I've used this with great success with organizations, with individuals. And it's funny how much can come out of just a couple of hours of dedicating yourself to this kind of exercise of figuring out what is it I care about so much that I refuse to compromise, and then how can I infuse that in my work so that people see that this is really who I am. That I'm not playing a game here. With regard to vision, I would really encourage people to consider, where and how do they want to impact people? And one way to do that is to, as I mentioned before, define that intended audience. So when you do a project, whenever you're engaging in a project, if you're going to be building something, making something, if you're going to be presenting something to your organization, an idea, whatever it is, sit down and very specifically define your intended audience and create that thing as if you're creating for one person. So that's a very simple exercise that I think anybody can do. With regard to mastery, I would encourage people to have a set of daily practices in their life. What are the set of daily practices that you need to be doing so that you can stay in game shape, so that you're ready at a moment's notice if you have to deliver results? So many of us, we only ramp up to do work when we have to do the work, when our back is against the wall, but we're not doing little daily things like sharpening our mind by filling it with inspiring ideas of other people, whether that's reading or if it's having conversations with other people who inspire us, or other things like that. If we're writers, we only write when we're being paid to write. For me, that's a big one. I have to write all the time because writing is not natural for me. I've released 3 books through Penguin since 2011. So 3 books in the last 4 years, right? 4 or 5 years. I've released, and that's a pretty good clip. That's a pretty significant pace to keep up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for something that's not natural for you, you do a great job at it.
Well, it's not natural at all for me. As a matter of fact, it's not, just between you and me, it's not something I really enjoy. I don't enjoy writing. It's painful for me to write, but I know that writing is the best way to get my ideas out to the world and make them consumable. And so as a result, what do? Every day I stay in game shape by writing every single day, regardless of how I feel, regardless of whether I want to, because I know if I only write when a publisher is paying me to write a book, or when a magazine is paying me to write an article, or when, I know if that's the case, then I'm not going to be as effective.
Right. It'd be like trying to cram for a marathon, right?
That's exactly right. It's the exact same thing. You cannot do it. It is if not physically impossible, it will destroy your body over time to do that. That's right. Exactly. So, so I would encourage people to think, what are the daily practices? And it could be 1 or 2 or 3, but what are the daily practices that you're going to incorporate into your life so that you're in game shape? And so those are just a couple of things that we can do to help us stay better focused and prepared.
In the book, you also talk about a through line. Can you talk about what is a through line and how does that relate to your work?
So the through line is your connective tissue. It's the theme that ties all of your work together. And Diempty, I called it your productive passion. And this word passion, as you referenced before, it comes from the root word that means to suffer. And when we talk about passion, we tend to talk about what we like. We tend to talk about things we like to do. Oh, I like ice cream, and I like football, and we call these things our passions. But the reality is, I'm probably not going to suffer for ice cream, right? I'm probably not going to suffer for football unless I play football, and then I would really suffer. But But, the reality is passion. When we think about passion, I find it helpful to reframe it as what do I care about so much that I am willing to suffer on behalf of it because it means so much to me? And what are the couple of things that define my work in that way? So for me, for example, I will tell you that part of my productive passion very clearly, and part of the through line for me is freedom. I will go to the mat to help people who are struggling to be free in whatever capacity that is. And it's always been that way. I mean, that's always kind of been the core through line for me. And so it probably, I know it finds form in my work. It's the thing that really I center most of my thoughts, most of my days around. That is really the thing that I spend my time doing, is fighting for the freedom of other people to do their best work. And so, that's for me, that's an example of a through line. And so that finds form in all of my work. That's really, I'm not interested in something if, regardless of how it pays and regardless of what kind of opportunity it is, if it doesn't revolve in some way around bringing people freedom, then I'm just not interested. It's not the kind of thing that I do. And so as a result, I'm building a somewhat consonant body of work because it's all sort of centered around that theme. Even if loosely, it's all kind of centered around that theme. And so that I would encourage people to look at where in your life have you been especially effective, and where in your life have you been moved with compassionate anger? Where have you been moved emotionally? Where have you had great hope even in the face of imminent disaster? Other people are jumping off the ship left and right, but you're thinking, I think we're going to be all right. These are the kinds of clues we can look at to identify places where we might be able to find a through line. And for me, again, that's been freedom for sure. That's kind of been one of the core themes that's resonated throughout my entire life and career.
Yeah, I can definitely see that in your work, especially when you start out with what you said at the beginning of the show, being an arms dealer for the creative revolution. That's just freedom right there.
Right, exactly.
You have a chapter called The Aspiration Gap. Can you explain what is that?
Yeah, so the aspiration gap is, I started that chapter with the quote from Ira Glass, and many people may have heard him talking about this, about the struggle of being a creative professional or being a creative or an artist, is that we have great taste, and we see something and we want to make something that sounds like, looks like, feels like that thing that has great taste, that we admire. But the problem is we don't have the skills. We're not able to bring that into being yet. We're not there yet. There's a gap between what we do and what we want to do or what we want to be able to do. And this is a real struggle for a lot of, professionals, a lot of creatives, is that, that gap. And so we get frustrated and we give up. But the problem is that really what we have to do instead of giving up is we have to push through that gap, and we have to develop ourselves. And so there are some distinct phases we go through as we do that. We go through these phases over and over and over and over again in our life, in our career, as we develop, as we grow. And the first phase is discovery, which is when we figure out something new that we want to do. Like, so maybe we discover a new work of art, or we discover, let's say we want to learn how to play guitar, right? So we hear somebody playing guitar and we think, oh, I could do that. So you go out and you buy a guitar and it sits in the closet for a couple of months and you never pick it up. But that's an important phase because you've discovered something new. You've been inspired to want to learn, to want to grow. But if you actually want to learn how to play guitar, you're going to have to take it out of the case, and you have to go through what I call emulation phase. An emulation phase is when you begin emulating other people around you. You begin incorporating things that you're seeing other people doing who are already doing it well. So maybe, if you're playing guitar, you listen to chords of my son's going through this right now. You listen to the music of people you admire, and you try to copy what they're doing and figure out what they're doing, and you practice till you get calluses on your fingers, and until you're sick and tired of it, but you're practicing because you really want to get better and build a platform. And that's emulation phase. And this is an important phase because this is where we build our capacity and our stamina and our resilience as artists, as creative professionals even. So when all of these things develop is during emulation phase. But then at some point we begin incorporating those things that we learn in emulation phase and applying them in new ways. So we begin applying them in unique ways from our own perspective. We use that platform we've built during emulation phase to sail perpendicular to the shoreline and to express ourselves in new ways. And this is great because this is when many people come into their own. It's when they really develop a unique, compelling presence because they're branching off of that, that emulation phase and doing something unique. But then inevitably we hit crisis phase at the top of the curve. And crisis phase is when we're no longer getting the same bang for our buck. We're not getting the same return on our effort. We're no longer seeing the kind of results that we want. And everybody around us is happy with what we're doing, but deep down we know that we've started to settle in.
So
we know
like
that we've become comfortable.
Plateau,
we plateau.
I've felt that before,
Exactly.
In my work where I feel like I'm plateauing, I'm not getting anything more out of it,
Exactly right. And so at this phase, what we have to do is we have to go back to discovery phase. We have to ask, okay, what new form of inspiration am I going to build into my life? What new skill am I going to learn? What new technique am I going to learn? How am I going to go back and refresh my skill set? How am I going to go back to the beginning and start emulating other people again and learning a new skill and trying something new in order to incorporate that into what I'm doing? And we see great artists, great musicians, great writers, great designers doing this all the time. This is what they do, right? This is how they learn something new. It's how they continue to grow, as they go back and they emulate, and then through emulation, then they begin to incorporate some new skills, some new techniques into their styles. So that's how we close the gap, is by observing, emulating, diverging, and then when we get to a place of stagnancy, then we go back and we repeat the process again, and we learn new skills and we develop. And it's not a linear thing, and it's not a once you do it once and you're done kind of thing. It happens in layers. It happens in different ways in different areas of our life. But this is the general tendency that we go through. And so it can be very helpful to know where you are in these phases. Are you stagnant? Have you plateaued? Are you in a place where you've been emulating somebody else for a while, and now it's time for you to step out into uncomfortable places and try something on your own and experiment and try to find your own way of communicating. So it's important for us to pay attention to where we are, because each phase kind of requires a different approach from us. But many people never ask that question. As a result, they get stuck in emulation phase, or they get stuck in crisis phase. Those are the two places we get stuck most often. And when that happens, we never close the gap.
Yeah, you think part of that's because of fear?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, fear is a tremendous force in our life. And by the way, this is, I think, really important to note. I mean, fear is not always a bad thing. Fear is kind of a dirty four-letter word, I think, in many circles these days. And
the F word, right?
It is. That's right. And people say, "Oh, fear is bad, and fear must be scrubbed out of every organization. You need to scrub fear out of your life." And I just want to be really clear. I'm glad that my kids are afraid of running in front of a car. I mean, I'm glad that strikes them with fear when they almost get run over by a car. I mean, that's a good thing. I want them to be afraid of getting run over by a car. What I don't want them to be afraid of are artificially escalated perceived consequences of failure. And that's where fear can become destructive, is when we artificially elevate the perceived consequences of failure to the point that we don't act, we don't try things, we don't experiment. We're afraid of what other people are going to think of us if we fail. And honestly, they probably aren't thinking of us anyway, and we don't have to worry about it. But, that happens. And so, that fear keeps us in a place of comfort and perceived stability. But the problem is that comfort becomes uncomfortable over time. Seth Godin, I think, articulated very, very well, your comfort zone and your safety zone are very, very different places. We tend to think our comfort zone is our safety zone, but in actuality, the comfort zone is sometimes the least safe place you can be if you want to continue to produce great work over time. And you can stay in your comfort zone for a while, but eventually you're going to find everybody else passing you by. So, fear absolutely plays into that in untold ways.
Yeah, and I know you've talked a lot about bravery in the past, and how does being brave, work with creativity? And
yeah, well, we just have to, every day we have to make it a practice of being brave. Bravery is a practice. Bravery isn't a natural state. We are biologically hardwired to avoid things that cause us discomfort and pain and things that scare us. And so, it's not something where we can just say, oh, well, that's a brave person. No, I mean, even people who are brave, who consistently, as a discipline, do things that other people are afraid to do, they'll tell you, yeah, of course I feel fear. I mean, of course I'm afraid of what's going to happen, but I'm acting in the face of my fear. And so, bravery, I think we have to embrace bravery as a discipline. Bravery is not a natural state. It's not something that's only common among superhumans. And in fact, if you don't feel fear, that's a dysfunction. if you never feel you're jumping out of an airplane or you're doing something that's important, I think that's something we have to really look at with you, because it's a natural human response to feel trepidation, anticipation, to feel the butterflies in your stomach when you do something that's weighty. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, I kind of think if you're doing something and you're not a little bit afraid of it, maybe you're not doing enough,
No, I agree. And if you never feel that jittery butterfly in the stomach, then you're probably not pushing yourself. And if you never fail, then you're probably not trying hard enough. And a lot of people have said that before, but it's so true. And it's something I have to ask myself on a regular basis. Am I failing enough? Am I stretching myself enough? Because if I'm not failing, I'm probably not trying.
Yeah, that's really good. One of the chapters in your book is titled "Developing Your Team's Voice," and being kind of a leadership guy. Can you tell me a little bit about what's in that chapter and what's some of the nuggets that we can maybe take away from that?
Yeah, so really, I mean, it all kind of comes back to, because of the nature of the book, it comes back to identity, vision, mastery. So does your team understand what it stands for? Does your team understand collectively what it is you're trying to do and the through line for your work? Do you understand when you're at your best? Do you understand the battle lines that are being drawn? Do you understand what's acceptable, what's not? So that's really important as a leader. I mean, you're really the dot connector in charge, right? You're the one who's connecting all the dots for people, making sure people understand the patterns of what's going on. Vision-wise, it's about understanding how you are shaping your work so it reaches your intended audience, not how one person on the team thinks that should happen, but how the team at large should be thinking about that. And again, as a leader, that's part of your job, is to make sure that the team is very clear about the expectations of who you are trying to reach. And then with regard to mastery, it's about making sure that your team has a set of skills that are being elevated, that you're helping to understand the skills that are necessary to get you to the next place, that you're putting in place things like daily practices, that you're encouraging your team to to step out and to try new things and to experiment. And part of your job as a leader is to ensure that you're pushing people into a place of discomfort and fear, which means making sure that they're embracing development, skill development, empathy, that you're paying attention to timing and how your ideas are timed so that they connect more readily with some themes that are already going on in the marketplace with people that you're trying to reach. So it's all those kinds of things that we have to do as leaders. And so as a leader, you are the dot connector in chief. That's your job. And so you don't have the luxury of just throwing yourself into the work. Your job is to help other people do the work effectively. Yeah,
that's really good. And I have to say, I think you're probably one of the most articulate people with your work. It's almost like you're speaking in tweets here. It's really good. Can you just leave us with one piece of advice that you have for how to become more creative as a professional?
Yeah, and so the thing I would encourage people in is that people think that creativity is a talent. They think it's a baked-in characteristic some people have, some people don't have. Well, I'm just not creative, or that person's creative, I'm not creative. And that's a myth. It's wrong. And we know that's wrong, and we've heard that a million times, but we don't embrace that. We still believe this myth. We believe the myth that some people are just touched by the gods. And listen, there's a difference between creativity and art. You may not be artistic. You may not be somebody who can design. You may not be somebody who can write eloquently, or create something other people are going to look at and it's going to inspire awe and wonder. You may not be one of those people. That's fine, but you're creative. You and I could not have this conversation right now if you were not creative, John, because you're making it up as you go, right?
Right.
We all have to solve problems every day. And so here's the thing I would encourage people in with regard to creativity. Creativity as a practice is about putting yourself in a place on a consistent basis where you're going to experience moments of serendipity, where you're going to experience breakthroughs because you're preparing yourself for those breakthroughs to occur. Some people are more naturally inclined to have those breakthroughs. Some people are not. So if you're one of those people who maybe is not just touched by the gods with brilliance, then you need to consider, how am I defining my work? Am I appropriately defined? Am I focusing in the right place? Am I allocating my attention to the right place? And have I clearly defined the problems I'm trying to solve? Am I connecting with other people through meaningful relationships? And and ensuring that I'm having stimulating conversations on a regular basis? Am I pruning? Am I managing my energy and pruning my priorities so that I'm focusing only on the things that are mattering most? Am I filling my life with stimuli that are firing me up, that are filling my well, that are fueling the engine, so that I have lots of stuff to draw from when I'm trying to generate ideas? And then finally, am I spending my hours just efficiently, or am I spending them effectively? Meaning, are you dedicating time to generating ideas? We'd say, oh, I want to be more creative. Well, how much time is on your calendar for generating ideas? Well, none. Well, so what you're saying basically is you want to be creative in the 5 minutes between you running from this meeting to that meeting. You want to have some breakthrough as you're passing the restroom. That's what you want. It doesn't happen that way. Creativity is a discipline. It's a practice. You have to put yourself in places where those dangerous intersections live, where you're going to see creative accidents more consistently. So that would be my encouragement to people, is just build some practices into your life, build space into your life so that breakthroughs can occur, because breakthroughs tend to happen in the white space.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think that's one of the things that we run into with business, on a daily basis, is people pack their calendars so full to be, efficient, but they don't leave room, like you just said, to be creative, to come up with those ideas and to have those brilliant breakthroughs. So that's fantastic. Really, I want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your work. I've actually just put The Accidental Creative as required reading for my course at Winthrop, Winthrop University. So I think that's fantastic of what you're doing. Can you tell our audience how they can reach out to you, or how they can contact you or learn more and order your books?
Yeah, the best way to reach me is toddhenry.com. That's toddhenry.com. And you can get to my company website from there. You can also get to my podcast. I do a podcast every week called The Accidental Creative, and lots of other stuff. And the books are all there as well. The latest book's called Louder Than Words.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, guys, that was my interview with Todd Henry, and you can get all the show notes and the links that we talked about, including links to his new book, Louder Than Words, at geekleader.com, episode 1.